you so much for joining BookHampton's virtual event with Florence Fabricant in conversation with Carolyn Brody. A few housekeeping details before we get started. All guests in this event right now are muted, and you all will remain muted throughout the duration of the event. For optimal viewing, you can use Zoom view functions, and it's in the top right corner of your screen. You can select speaker view so that our author is highlighted on your screen when talking. Please ask questions in the chat box function of your Zoom screen. We will get to as many of your questions as possible throughout the event, and I will be monitoring the chat box, so you can send all questions to me. If at any time you drop off the Zoom or you experience technical difficulties, simply click the link again that we sent you to be readmitted. Please don't forget to purchase a copy of the Ladies Village Improvement Society cookbook at bookhampton.com, and you can click the link that I will be sending you all in your chat box. So thank you again for joining BookHampton, and without further ado, please welcome Ann Thomas and Mary Talley, who will be speaking before the conversation with Florence and Carolyn begins. So take it away, Ann and Mary.
Hello, I'm Mary Talley. This year, the Ladies Village Improvement Society is celebrating its 125th anniversary. LVIS is a volunteer organization dedicated to preserving the beauty of East Hampton and to providing scholarships for high school seniors. The annual LVIS Fair is one of the major summer attractions in the Hamptons, and our thrift shops have a loyal following of customers looking for fashions, books, furniture, and all sorts of things in our housewares department. Unfortunately, the shops have been closed since the COVID-19 pandemic began. And for the first time since World War I and the Great Depression, the fair has been canceled. However, plans to safely reopen the shops are underway, and hopefully next year's fair will once again be on the LVIS grounds. In 2016, the membership was asked, what would you like to see as part of our anniversary celebration? The overwhelming choice was to publish a cookbook. Cookbooks are a part of the LVIS history. Our first one was published in 1896, the last one in 1995, and this delightful book is our 13th cookbook. It's not only a great source of recipes, but it is a great read. Anne?
It is that. And the coincidence is this is Florence's 13th book as well. I believe that's correct. When we started out on this project, I went into the LVIS archive and was reading some fascinating history that was written by Eunice Juckett Meeker, who I believe was a New York Times travel writer, and she was a member of LVIS. And in my perusing, I came across a couple of comments in some past editions from Florence Fabricant, and I thought, oh, just a minute. And so I thought I'd been to Stirring the Pot at Guildhall, and of course knew of Florence's reputation. And so I called Ruth Appelhoff, who was a member of LVIS, and asked her if there was a chance she could get Florence to talk with us for a few minutes over the phone. And of course she did better than that. So we had a lunch meeting with Florence, with Bonnie Kropinski and Florence and me at Cheetah. And it was a January day, and we had to watch out for the window of time because Florence was sandwiching us between skiing, cross-country skiing with Richard, and her tennis game. So we had a very brief meeting. It was very productive. And Florence said, let me introduce you to my publisher, Charles Myers at Rizzoli. So Mary and I set off one day on the jitney and went to meet with Florence and Charles Meyer, a delightful man. And it was a fait accompli. Florence had already gotten this deal done, I think. And we've been riding on Florence's coattails ever since. We've had more fun working on this, and Florence is one hardworking lady. We've spent many, many Sunday afternoons around her table or someone else's on the committee, proofing and reading and looking over every detail. And it's a pleasure to have had this experience working with Florence, and what a treasure we have to cherish for years and years. So we are indebted to Florence, and we thank her so much for all she's done for our organization and for us, and with great admiration and affection.
Okay, thank you, Anne and Mary, and welcome to everyone, and happy Memorial Day weekend on behalf of BookHampton. This is not how we usually celebrate Memorial Day weekend, needless to say, but we do always have a book of local interest. And when we first heard about this cookbook, which was months and months ago, I mean, I think it was even the end of 2019, we sort of said, oh my God, this is going to be so great. We have to book it immediately for Memorial Day weekend, not having no clue what it was really going to look like. But I can tell already that this is sort of a mutual admiration society, so it'll be fun. And really congratulations to LVIS on its 125th anniversary and for the publication of this glorious cookbook. You'll see, and I'm going to hold it up just for a minute so you get to see just really how stunning this cookbook is, and I'll move to the inside of it over time. But it's really a remarkable undertaking, and I have to say that as a part-time resident of East Hampton since for about 30 years, and as a neighbor with BookHampton of LVIS, I really I'm in enormous awe, and personally thank you and the organization for what you do to steward so much of what we love about BookHampton. And as you read this book, there's so many parts of it that just really bring that to life. So we all owe LVIS a debt of gratitude. So thanks. And so Anne talked a little bit about this. Anne and Mary were part of a cookbook committee, which is a sort of an unusual thing. And they reached out to Florence to write this cookbook. And it was, you know, a brilliant idea. I mean, it was an inspired choice. It was a brilliant idea to do the cookbook. I love that the first one was in 1896, my God, and there have been 13, magic number. And then just to reach out to Florence again, such an inspired choice. And Florence, most of you know this, she's a longtime food and wine writer for the New York Times. She's the author again of 13, the lucky number in this case, cookbooks, and a part-time resident of East Hampton since 1965. What I found really kind of just remarkable is that she started her journalistic career in 1972 writing a column called In Season for the East Hampton Star. And those were the days when, you know, the food scene out here was not like it is today. It was sort of, you bought your groceries at the local A&P, you found a food stand that was really way off the radar, and maybe there were a couple vineyards. But Florence in 1972 really promoted and celebrated much of what we now know as eat local, shop local, farm to table, way before it came a thing. And she did it out here. And of course, this is now so much a huge part of what East Hampton is, and the East End in general, is known for. So welcome, Florence, and thank you for joining us. And before we talk about this book specifically, I thought it might be interesting to have you describe the arc of the food scene, as it were, from when you first were writing for the East Hampton Star in 1972 to where we are now. You've had a terrific kind of catbird seat. So I'm just curious, what have been the biggest changes you've seen? Sort of how has food shopping changed, eating, entertainment, et cetera? And really, how has the food culture in general changed over those years?
Well, food in general, and I would say worldwide, nationally, locally, has gone from being kind of an afterthought to the center of the plate, in the sense that it drives so much. We know how much it drives the economy these days. We've been reading about the whole restaurant scene and how it's suffering, but it has become central to so many people's lives. And it's not just about a particular dish or a ripe tomato or some beautiful strawberries coming right out of the field, but it's gotten political implications, health implications. It touches our lives in every which way. It has become, this is kind of weird, but it has become all-consuming, if you will. And that's the biggest change, because I was kind of between jobs, and I got the idea to do a column for the East Hampton Star because there was no food column at the time. And I would go in, I've been interested in food forever. My parents were foodies back in the day when such a thing didn't exist. They were always at the latest restaurants in New York, and I grew up going to those places. And my mother was a wonderful cook. And out here, it was very frustrating because the supermarkets had nothing, and you really had to know what little farm stand there might be, or what card table in someone's front yard had some fresh corn and that kind of thing. And back in those days, to tell you the truth, I was still not willing to buy corn except when it's fresh from the field here. That goes back that far for me. And at that time, about the only place where you could really stock up on wonderfully freshly grown and seriously good produce was the Green Thumb and Watermill.
Mm-hmm.
But back in the 70s, it took 10 minutes from East Hampton to get there. Now, well, let's not even discuss it. But the whole thing has changed. So because back in those days, if you wanted good cheese, you had to bring it from New York. Eventually there was a cheese shop, but it took a long time before not only the shopping became much more vital and vibrant and interesting and reliable and even organic, but the farms changed, because back in the 70s, they were growing potatoes as commodities that were being shipped to Russia because of famine in Russia. And you didn't have farms that were growing a row of arugula and a row of scallions and a row of fava beans and that kind of thing. So the variety that it took the farmers a long time to shake this whole commodity sensibility and begin to indulge in what the consumers started to want. I mean, it worked hand in hand also with restaurants. People become familiar with new foods through dining. And then they asked the farmers for them. And the farmers, at first, they didn't know what arugula was. But now it's, a commonplace. And I have to tell you, back in 1972, there were no vineyards yet. They came along maybe a year or two later. I think the Hargraves started in 73. And look at what's going on now. It's amazing. It's really amazing. And beer and spirits. It's really a bounty. And it's wonderful to be here, and it's attracting good chefs.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's funny because it really, would you say that it was sort of the consumer leading the farmers, and now it's kind of everyone embracing the same thing together, including the CSAs and et cetera? I mean, now it seems to work. It's more holistic, it feels like.
Yes, yeah. It's everywhere and it's everything.
Yeah.
And the consumer has become much more discerning, much more demanding. I still know people who don't cook at all, but it's become, the consumer has become a force,
Mm-hmm.
shall we say. And combined with the chefs, who also are pushing the envelope on what's available and what you can do. I mean, they're raising livestock on the North Fork. If you wanted protein on the plate, yes, you could get eggs and chickens at Iacono, but you couldn't buy a piece of meat from Long Island, and now you can. It's pretty amazing. Snails. There's the woman who's raising Feisty Acres, who's raising quail, and she says they eat the ticks. So let's hear it for the quail.
That's great. So let's go to the book. First of all, as I said, and you can see, and you will see when you buy it, it's a really handsome book. It's called The Ladies Village Improvement Society Cookbook: Eating and Entertaining in East Hampton. And we can talk about how that title came about at some point. The photographs are by Doug Young, and they are absolutely gorgeous, both the food itself and the landscape. Martha Stewart wrote a foreword. Bess Rattray wrote a fabulous 8-page history of LVIS, which is really more than LVIS. I mean, it sort of tells you all about East Hampton at the same time. And then also, Florence, I was Your daughter, Patricia, who's an artist who worked with you on this book, this is the 7th time you've worked together on books. And so it's her beautiful design that contributed. So really hats off to all of you. So Anne did talk about this. There was a cookbook committee. They had a wish. They approached you about doing a cookbook. And you mentioned in the book that you have over the years collected the LVIS cookbooks and were really charmed by them. And I think that's a wonderful choice of words, by the way, to say charmed, because it's not just kind of cooking from them, but it's really the, you know, the spirit and the old fashioned, just really traditions that come alive through those books. But anyway, but I'm curious why, you know, what made you respond? What made you, how were you enticed to take on this project? And was it a kind of a slow courtship, or did you say yes right away? Or what were you thinking when they first came to you?
Well, they came to me at a good moment because I wasn't working on another cookbook at that point. And I was really intrigued with the idea of doing a book that reflected what I love so much about this area. And I love LVIS. I've been a supporter. I'm not a member, but I've been a supporter for many, many years, going back to when my children were toddlers and would try and find used books in the bookstore to take home. Old books and that kind of thing. And of course the LVIS fair, and knowing all the wonderful things. And I'm a history buff as well. So historically, going back to the older LVIS cookbooks that I picked up over the years, and to see chapters filled with oyster recipes, because that was the cheap protein back 100 years ago. All of what was being done with things like molasses and cornmeal. And, you know, there's a real thread of how food evolved in the northeastern United States more than anything that goes through these very books. And, you know, in those days, it was a teacup of sherry into the cake, not an exact measurement and that kind of thing. And I'm used to that. I've got quite a collection of community cookbooks from all over the country. And the LVIS always struck a chord with me because I'm so familiar with the area. So it was, you know, it was pretty easy to say, sure, I'll give it a shot. And having the committee, which struck me as being a group of women who were really hands-on, no nonsense, determined to dig in and get this thing done, was extremely useful for me and gratifying. I've had a couple of other experiences with benefit cookbooks, the one I did for Sloan Kettering called Park Avenue Potluck, for example. And again, there was a committee of these women, and they were my safety net in many, many ways. And so it was wonderful to work with them. And I had suspected I'd have a similar experience here. And well, I did.
It's funny, I was going to ask you that. So what was the process like? And Anne and Mary, along with a few other women who hopefully are on the Zoom, were part of that committee. But you've done it a few times. But I'm just curious if it's, you know, what the process was like, what the backing and forthing was like, and you know, how you work together, and if you ever sat in the same room or you were on phone calls, and what parts of it were fun, and then, you know, what parts of it were did it ever get a little dodgy among all of you?
Well, what made it wonderful for me is we decided fairly early on that a seasonal menu cookbook made the most sense. And then it was a matter of gathering the recipes. And they said that I could avail myself of whatever recipes I found in prior LVIS cookbooks. But they put out a call to arms in their membership and to a list of celebrities that we drew up to request recipes. Now, we didn't know what was coming in and what recipes there would be. One of the menu cookbooks I did previously, we started with 400 recipes in order to narrow it down to about 100. The ground rules were no recipes that came from other publications like magazines or other cookbooks, no recipes that depended on opening a can of soup or sauce, and no recipes. I have a pretty good eye for recipes that copy recipes that are out there, and I didn't want any of those. And so gradually, in sifting through, we narrowed the list. I asked a lot of questions, and a lot of the women on the committee went back to sources to find out, because we wanted to give some background on the recipe. Where did this recipe come from? How come you submitted it? How do you know about it? And so forth. So there was a lot of back and forth, and I have to say the committee was beyond fabulous in helping with that aspect of it. And there were also a number of recipes from older cookbooks, and even some of the ones that were submitted that had, I had questions, you know, put into a baking dish and bake until done. Well, you could do that. I could do that. A good cook could do that. But in today's culture of cooking, somebody would want to know what size baking dish, what temperature oven, and how long will it be till it's done. So the committee was helpful in testing some of those details, testing out some of those details. I tested most of the recipes myself, but I would say maybe 10 or 15% were tested by the committee, and it was extremely helpful.
Good. So you mentioned the book is a compilation of 100 recipes, and it's organized by seasonally and by menu. So I'm just gonna share with everyone, and I'm gonna try to show pictures. Just these are some of my favorite chapter headings, and it's just so you get a sense of the range. So just bear with me. So this is the first one I love, which is, I don't know if you can see this. This is the farm stands reopening. And then you go to, which is kind of right now, as we all know. Let me see if I can find this, sorry. Then we go to strawberry time. Can you see that? Am I being helpful here at all?
Yeah, you can see that.
So we go to strawberry time, and then we go to pasta on the porch, and you'll sort of see this, you know, the introduction, the text, and then you'll see these great photographs. And then we go, I just have about 5 more of these, and then we go to beach picnic. Again, this sort of stunning beach scene. You have to talk about where these were all styled. And then we move on to fall. So now we're in Labor Day grilling. And then we go to, let me find this, my next favorite. Oh, here we have Christy Brinkley's couscous, which we'll get to in a minute. And then we have autumn catch. And then we end up with, let me just see. Oh, Florence's sunflower seed salad, but let's skip over that for the moment. And then we have leaf raking lunch. Did you come up with all these? Because I just love these. And then holiday open house. And then we close with, or almost close with, chowder supper. So I just, you know, I do this both because it's just, it sort of shows the range, it shows the organization, and you can, all of us who live out here and shop out here, and even those who don't, you can imagine kind of where you're looking for the groceries and what you're doing and who's, you know, who's helping you. So I'm curious to know that, you know, you mentioned how you solicited those recipes. You looked at prior texts, other cookbooks, or you looked at prior LVIS cookbooks. And then did you scour? You've also got a section in there that's kind of improvements. So I assume, and then you've got some wine pairings. So can you talk a little bit about the format that you used and how you organized it and what you added to kind of bring it up into the present moment?
Well, the little paragraphs called improvements are just tips relating to the recipe, how to use a leftover, how to do a little variation of this or that. And we call them improvements because it's a play on the name of the organization.
Oh, I didn't even get that, right.
And as far as the wine and drinks pairing, I mean, that's kind of a natural. And whenever possible, I suggested wines from the local region because why not? But what I didn't want, and I think we've achieved this kind of balance, I didn't want one of these monogram, pinky up, gorgeous, beautiful home, impeccable table kind of menu one after another. I wanted enough variety so you could do a casual affair or just make chowder and serve that with a salad. There have been so many of these fancy Hampton's cookbooks, and I really didn't want to dwell on that kind of style that everybody knows, and you know, the white shoes and the beautiful lattice work and the lovely gardens. We have all of that, but at the same time, you've got a leaflet raking lunch. And and what tickled me about that one is that I was determined to make a clam pie. I've always loved clam pie, and most clam pie recipes are pretty similar. Some with potatoes, some not with potatoes. There are little variations, and what I did was sort of a mashup of 3 or 4 recipes that had appeared in old LVIS cookbooks for clam pie, and I was kind of proud of the one I came up with.
Yeah, it looks yummy. So let's talk about variety for a minute in terms of the recipes. There are recipes by LVIS members. There are recipes by local restaurateurs. There are recipes by farm stand submitted recipes, wineries. There's kind of a whole range of really local people, local food organizations, food stores, etc., who are all well represented. And then I'm going to talk about the celebrities in a minute. But I'm just curious if you want to mention sort of, you know, who you went to. I know it's Topping Rose and John Papa's Cafe and so on and so forth. But you want to talk about who submitted. Did you have a wish list of people and groups and you know, both suppliers and vendors and eateries who you wanted to have represented?
Absolutely. And then as we started organizing the menus, and there were people whose recipes we had not yet been able to get, it started to narrow down to the point where if we went to a particular restaurant for a recipe, we asked for a particular type of recipe because we wanted to fill a hole in a menu. We would want a dessert recipe or a soup recipe or this or that. So there was a lot of that. In the beginning, we didn't, because it was a question of, you know, what we got in and where it all fit and shuffled around. But then it became evident that we'd need another salad here, or we'd need a pasta there. And so we then would target certain restaurants or chefs or people we know or members for a particular recipe.
Can you tell us a little bit about some of the people who were represented, the places and the people, just to give us a taste, no pun intended, as it were?
Well, it's a pretty broad cross section. For example, Almond Restaurant in Bridgehampton, he does a Caesar salad with cooked and raw Brussels sprouts, cooked ones and shaved ones, which I've always loved. And that was the recipe I asked him for, and that's the recipe we got. There were others. I felt Topping Rose was a very significant restaurant, and I wanted a recipe from that place no matter what. I wanted a recipe from Nick and Tony's. I wanted a recipe from Fresno, from 1770 House, from a lot of the significant players out here who support the community, and the community depends on them. And most were really very forthcoming and helpful. There were some that we never heard from, but what can you do?
And how about celebrities?
There was
There's always a celebrity quotient. How about celebrities? Who's represented in the book, and what were the recipes? I have a few.
Eric Repair gave us a recipe for a melon soup that I couldn't get over, because when he submitted it, I thought he'd left out half a dozen ingredients, because it's made with melon and olive oil, salt, and that's it. That's all that it is, and it's fabulous. And we also wanted Ralph Lauren's wife, Ricky's mother, has been mentioned in a number of contexts for her brownies. And in fact, the brownies are served at the little cafes that Ralph had set up at his stores. So I wanted that brownie recipe, and it's a wonderful recipe. So there were certain things targeted like that. And then in the course of soliciting from the members, a number of members were also celebrities. We also wanted artists. Ruth Appelhoff dug in her files from Lee Krasner and found a recipe that we were able to incorporate. Martha Stewart, and on and on.
Yeah. I know Laurie Anderson has a recipe that just on its name only, it's called Laurie Anderson's Birdhouse Potatoes with Brussels sprouts, snap peas, and mushrooms. So that alone makes it really quite interesting.
Let me tell you something about that recipe. It is so good that I started making it for Thanksgiving instead of the potato gratin that I'd always been making. And I started making that recipe, and I made that recipe for the two most recent Thanksgivings our family has had.
Oh, how funny. And then Ina's in there, and then there's the spanakopita from John Pappas, and then you've got Dreesen's donut pudding of all, so it's hard not to, it's hard to miss on that. So I'm mindful of the time because there are a lot of questions, or there will be some questions, but just briefly also, so the subtitle of the book is Eating and Entertaining in East Hampton. And so we've talked about eating, but we haven't talked too much about entertaining. So just briefly, can you describe how that's changed over the years? And then what would you describe as the East Hampton style, if there is such a thing, of entertaining in the more LVIS cookbook spirited way, not the sort of, not what we see in the glossier coffee table books, but what we find in your book?
Well, I don't know. I mean, entertaining can take so many forms. It can be just having another couple over for dinner. So dinner for 4 is appropriate for entertaining, and it's a year-round thing. Or you can have a cocktail bash. I think the one thing I've found is a great increase in the availability of caterers and people using caterers, and kind of the formalization of entertaining. It's nice to see at a cocktail party that you don't have to drink out of a plastic glass. I have a thing for that. But, it's evolved, but I think people who are serious about their own cooking love to entertain. And I think that that's what I hope is reflected here, because the recipes come from good cooks, and a good cook wants to share. You're not cooking for one, or even just for 2, although I've been doing a lot of that lately, as we all have. But good food needs to be shared. And I'm hoping that aspect is what comes through on the entertaining front. And I think through the photographs, they're beautiful settings, but not everything is china and silver and stemware and flower arrangements. There's a lot more casualness, which I think is just fabulous, because I love to do that.
Yeah, it comes across as very real, very authentic, and very warm and accessible and approachable in the best way. You know, it's not a scary, intimidating book at all in any respect. I will go to questions in a minute, but you know, it's funny because, as I say, from a bookstore perspective, we get people who come in and they say, I want a book on something about local, you know, local interest, which is an important category. And we have a few go-to books, and they're usually fairly narrow, most of them, or they're quite glorious pictures and not so much more. And this is a book, and it's one of the reasons that we're so happy to have it, that really talks about local history, local traditions, local people, local style, local landscape. I mean, one of the things we sort of missed in here is these photographs really also celebrate the landscape and the preservation of East Hampton. So it really honors so much of what this place is all about, and therefore what the book, you know, what the book comes to celebrate and all of that. So I'm going to move now to questions, if that's okay. I mean, I have to get closer to the screen. Okay, so Eliza asked, was anything surprising or memorable that, Florence, you learned about East Hampton or its cuisine while working on the book that you didn't know before?
Well, that's an interesting. I think a lot of what Bess Rattray put forth in her introduction and her historic notes, the history of LVIS, and also the whole business about creating sidewalks was something I was unaware of, and also the different headquarters of LVIS. The history was something that I did find quite arresting and enlightening. I thought I knew a lot about East Hampton, and I learned a lot.
Speaking of history, what can you tell us about the history of Long Island duck farms? Crescent Farm was one of my key restaurant suppliers, but I'd love to know more about the history of Long Island duck.
Well, there were duck farms, and gradually they disappeared. I mean, if you want to go really into the weeds on this, in Mecox, when we first came out here, there was this duck farm, and you held your nose as you drove past on the highway because the stench was quite something. That went by the boards, and I understand that the duck farm, is it Crescent or Molosky's? One of those just shut down because of the pandemic. But an interesting bit of history is that what is now Loaves and Fishes was originally this little white shack known for rotisserie ducks. And there was a guy named John Tillotson who made those rotisserie ducks. He sold, and then also at the time, there was the John Duck Jr. restaurant in Southampton near the railroad. But the Tillotson building was sold to Devin Fredericks, who is Tina Fredericks' daughter. Tina Fredericks is an important real estate person here. And Devin and her friend Susan Costner, who's now on the West Coast, they bought it. They created Loaves and Fishes. Devin went on to marry Eli Zabar, but they went on to create Loaves and Fishes, and it was Anna Pump who worked for them, and they sold it to her. So Anna Pump did not create Loaves and Fishes, but the history goes back to the ducks. And those ducks, those rotisserie ducks, were so amazing. And I finally got the recipe, and what he would do with his ducks was slather them with mayonnaise before he put them on the spit. And very recently, Kenji Lopez-Alt, who is a contributor to the New York Times and something of a cooking scientist, did a whole piece on using mayonnaise in things like that, and even on meat. So this guy Tillotson knew what he was doing.
Yeah, even then.
Yeah.
Okay, so someone else asked, how did you choose the Pierre Frenet recipe? You should probably explain what recipe it is.
I asked Jacques Frenet for a recipe.
Easy enough.
Yeah, and he gave us that, and it worked in the menu, and so I didn't look any further.
Yeah, okay. And then someone else asked, what's your go-to meal in the Hamptons to eat out and to cook?
Well, I'd rather not put my name on a recommendation for
Mhm.
any one restaurant. But I would say when I eat out, more often than not, it might be really nicely grilled fish or roast chicken. But for a recipe, for a dish or a menu to do at home, I look for easy, and there are a few dishes, not all of them most of them not in the book, that I turn to when I'm entertaining. Especially, I do clams with bacon and scallions that are kind of like Clams Casino, but not, that I've been doing forever. And I learned how to open my own clams, and I love opening my own clams.
Mhm.
That's the go-to recipe all the time. I love to do duck breast, and I have a very particular method when I'm entertaining that keeps me out of the kitchen doing duck breast. So that's another thing. And, you know, you can concoct any kind of a sauce, a fruit sauce or what have you, to go alongside. If there's fresh corn, I'll do fresh corn, and sometimes do a corn salad or corn tortillas or something like that as a separate first course. I love to do a toss of corn and chanterelle in a warm dressing on arugula. It's just corn and chanterelle just go together so beautifully. And if you know where to look in Nappy, you can gather your own chanterelle.
Okay. And actually, speaking of where foraging or where to look, so the next question is, where do you get your clams?
I buy them at the seafood shop. I
Yeah.
don't do. I've done mussling, but you know, it's very time consuming, and
Yeah.
I'm really busy.
Yeah, yeah.
And when you you gather your own mussels, they're really dirty. And the ones that you get, they're usually from Prince Edward Island, are just pristine.
Yeah, yeah, it's a lot of work otherwise. There are no more questions, but there's something I forgot to ask you, which is this is not in the cookbook, but since we're in the midst of a pandemic and you're here and you know so much, and I'm sure you've thought about it and read far more than any of us, I'm just, you know, since we've got just a couple minutes here, I'm curious to know if you talk a little bit about how you know, when we've read this in the papers, but how you think the pandemic is affecting restaurants. You can talk about this locally or just in general, or food supply or eating or cooking, or, you know, it's sort of like, what's the next new normal look like in the world of food and food?
Well, I think on the food scene, it's a disaster. It's an unmitigated disaster that we'll be counting the bodies, so to speak, in terms of the loss of restaurants and suppliers for a long time. The farmers need to sell their goods. And in an area like this, if they did not have a market in the restaurants, at least the local people or the vacationers or whoever could pick it up. You have a lot of the big food suppliers now selling to consumers because their market has dried up. They're not selling to schools. They're not selling to other institutional dining rooms. They're not selling to restaurants. And it may very well be the kind of shift of seeing that those kinds of companies delivering to homes might very well continue. At the same time, restaurants that are now selling all kinds of dry goods and groceries and not just prepared food, but ingredients, you will probably continue to see that. People may very well get used to buying their tortillas from the local Mexican restaurant. And why not continue, or buying a bag of chilies or something like that. I think before the restaurants come back, I think people have to feel safe. And most of the people I know and I talk to say it's going to be a long time before they will go into a restaurant and sit down to have dinner. A restaurant that's only half filled, a restaurant where you need this protective gear, where you can't hang at the bar. It's really a shame. I think what we may be seeing, and fortunately it's summertime into fall, we may be seeing a lot more outdoor dining.
Mhm.
And I think the town and village have to be much more accommodating to restaurants that want to do that, because I think people will be. I mean, I said to somebody, I think the first restaurant I'll go to have a meal will be the Clam Bar in Napeague,
Yeah.
because I could sit outside and they could space the tables, and yet I won't feel like I'm in an empty restaurant, you know, and I'll have a bowl of steamers or a lobster roll or something there. So, but I think it is going to take a long time. A vaccine, I think, will make people feel much more secure if there is a proven one. And I really feel for the people who have put their hearts and souls into these restaurants, and most of them are from people who are not just buying a McDonald's franchise. They really want their food in front of people who appreciate it, and they work all day, all night to achieve that. They run on a razor thin margin. And also to remember that the restaurant business is the one, hospitality business is the one business where you can start with no education. You can be even, you know, an immigrant, no English and everything, and work your way up to the point of becoming a head chef. There are many, many examples. Guys who started as a dishwasher now own their own restaurants, fancy steakhouse. Those kinds of rags to riches stories are the backbone in many ways of the economy. And there is an urge to see it return, but I think that the brakes are going to be on for quite a while until, and now maybe other states feel differently about it, maybe other localities, but I don't think you can be frivolous about this. And I think the government has to step in. I think the government has to do an awful lot more, because if they're supporting the big fast food chains, they're supporting stockholders. They're not, and the ones that really need help are the small businesses.
This is I was just thinking, because when you said outdoor eating, outdoor seating, because it's such an issue in the village, and I was thinking that Mary and Ann, for LVIS, this is another sort of charge to take on, you know, a cause to take on, because there's really so much local that comes under threat with things like this. So I agree. We're out of time, I'm sorry, but I want to thank you all so much. Again, it's a terrific book. Please go online and buy it from BookHampton. But again, we've had people, as I know LVIS has too, that people come into the store, so you buy it as a cookbook. So you buy it as a house gift. You buy it as we've had people from California who have houses down here, and they said, I've had house guests over the past 10 years. They love East Hampton. I want to send something to remind them of East Hampton. So they, you know, that's where you get the 10 books to California, the 7 books to, you know, Georgia or wherever they're going. And then I think it's, you know, a coffee table book, and it really is a history book. I mean, it sits kind of right up there with not just cookbooks, but the East Hampton Village books that we've had. So I thank the LVIS for publishing this book, and Florence, I especially thank you for writing it, and Ann and Mary for bringing it into being, and all of LVIS. And Thanks to all of you for joining. We keep checking back on BookHampton's calendar because we have a lot of more exciting Zooms coming up, and we'll get through the summer in the same way we, had glorious events before. We'll keep going. So thank you again.
Thank you, Carolyn. I'm humbled by your appreciation.